If you think about what tourism does, it creates trust, it creates connectivity, and that is so important, not just in China, but in Asia as a culture generally. And what we've seen is that in corresponding sectors, when the increase in Chinese visitation to Australia has been 20-30%, if you take wine for an example, wine exports in 2016 to China, according to LEK, increased by 40% the following year.
Chinese tourists sampling wine while visiting Australia and taking that knowledge back with them to spread the word is only part of the story. The inroads made by Australian wine into China are on a much larger scale.
There's about 60 million cases going into China now. It is one of the interesting things, though, is it's much more premium than a lot of people expect. Particularly Australian wine. Australia, out of the top 5 importers, Australia is the biggest per litre rate. Much bigger than France, much bigger than the other old world countries that are in that top 5 group. So I think the potential here is huge because we've only really scratched the surface.
The popularity of Australian wine with Chinese consumers is driven by a number of factors.
I think that it starts from a fundamental perception of Australia being pure, clean, fresh, quality control, and the diversity of wines we can produce from sweet, white, fruity, heavy red, light red. It's just incredible. And innovative as well, which means we're a lot more creative. And then all the funding side with the governments, both sides, has all gone into the pot at the same time. When you add them all together, you're sitting on $1 billion worth of business and a value per litre which is second to none.
There is definitely a changing taste in China, without absolute question of that. I mean, in the early days, the people who really got behind the fine wine side of things were very rich, wealthy people who all went for luxury European products, which included wine, particularly first growth wines from Bordeaux. But that's all changed as the Chinese have become better travelled, tasting more different wines, engaging with their own wine shows, different ways of talking to each other on the social media.
We're here at the 2019 China Food and Drinks Fair in Chengdu to discover more about the penetration of Australian New World wine into China.
It's a thriving community full of Chinese people keen to meet the winemaker, to talk to them, even through interpreters. All we see is just positive forward momentum.
China is now home to a new generation of wine consumers. They are young, well-educated and well-travelled with a hunger for knowledge. James Halliday, revered wine critic and Australian wine expert, highlights the unique challenges the Chinese wine market poses for Australian wines.
It's the first major market that we've had where English is not the first language. It's the first market that we've had where wine and food wasn't understood as a whole natural thing to go together.
James Halliday is attending the show to hold tasting masterclasses and promote the Chinese edition of the Halliday Wine Companion. Over the past 40 years, Australians have fondly called it the Bible of Australian wine.
Well, the Halliday Companion is part book, part online. So if we just talk about in the book, you get tasting notes and ratings and prices. You take those together, it's about 6,000. If you add the other 3,500 that are tasted in each year, you're up around 9,500 as the number of wines tasted each year for the companion in whatever form that may end up being.
So last year we launched the first Chinese version of Halliday Wine Companion. So we are very excited. Last November, we officially released this book, and the sales is fantastic. But this year, we are more excited. Why I say that? Actually, it's the end of this month. We are launching the digital version. That is mini program. Because in China, everyone using mobile phone. We live with the online platform. So this is the first initiative. We want to reaching broader audience from trade people to consumers.
There's a lot of marketing going on here in China, but really it misses the essential ingredient, which is tasting and understanding what you should be looking for.
Halliday's first Chinese edition plans to tap into the exponential growth of the wine culture in China. Chinese cities now offer a wine, spirit and education trust course, educational seminars on wine, and tasting and wine education classes. The number of sommeliers and wine bars is also on the rise. In this environment, consumers are eager to develop their knowledge of wine, varieties and the winemaking process, as well as bottled experiences.
I think there's a lot of interest in family-style boutique storied wineries, and it plays a little bit to the confidence issue we were talking about, because if people meet the owner and it's limited, small production, they love telling that story, and particularly if they go and visit, because they can go back to their events and say, well, when I met Mr. who's the owner of they feel much more confident.
It's my belief that the great wines of the world are produced when there's a connection between the vineyard and the winery. There's not one without the other. And as I said before, the reason why I get involved in the vineyard management is so that I can understand not only that vineyard, but that season.
Today, the varieties of Australian wine consumed in China are changing. A market traditionally dominated by heavy Barossa Shiraz is now transforming to include a much broader spectrum of taste, including Pinot Noir, Chardonnay and Rosé.
Women are probably more interested in wine in China than men, and in fact most of the wine education forums are heavily skewed towards women.
The future for really premium Australian wines is here. I mean, it's not even future. The Penfolds or Treasury Wine Estate has demonstrated that really in so many different ways, and they're doing a great job for Australia.
Australia is also helping China to further develop its own wine industry. We've travelled back to Australia to a winery near the country town of Shepparton. Here at the University of Melbourne's Dookie campus, Chinese students are immersing themselves in the full wine experience with an eye on the future. Lecturer Chris Barnes has a view that provides food for thought for an industry experiencing unprecedented growth.
Because one of the things the Chinese want to do is not just learn about wine, they want to make it themselves. And they are in a process of planting vast amounts of vineyard. They're setting up large wine producing businesses. They're looking at consultants from Australia and from Europe to help them out with that. But one of the things they want to learn from us is the generational nature of wine, in the sense of a mature vineyard, 20, 30 years, and make that wine over a couple of decades before you really get it and before you're able to do it. Our challenge is to be able to convince the Chinese market as exporters, convince them that we produce not just everyday good value red wine, but we produce great quality red wine that is of world standard, that is going to be better than what they're able to produce on a day-to-day basis. And that's our challenge in the next decade or two.
This challenge and the sharing of wine knowledge with China are not incompatible. While Australia is helping China establish its own high-volume wine production industry, Australian winemakers are positioning Australian wine as premium and handcrafted to meet growing demand. It's a strategy designed to ensure China's love affair with the Australian wine drinking experience will continue on into the future.